Good morning. Beijing is now holding two Canadians, apparently doubling the reprisals for Canada's arrest of a rich and powerful Chinese executive and multiplying the concerns for Ottawa this morning in this deepening diplomatic dispute. We're going to lead off this hour with Hannah Thibodeau, who is in Ottawa. Much attention there in Ottawa to this story. What do we know about the second Canadian, Hannah, who is identified as Michael Spavor?
That's right. Michael Spavor is an Alberta entrepreneur, and he has very close ties with the North Korean regime. In fact, he facilitated for the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, a meeting between many athletes, including in 2013 NBA star Dennis Rodman. Now, Spavor reached out to the Canadian government after he was being questioned by the Chinese authorities, and he hasn't been heard from since. So here is Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland.
We are working very hard to ascertain his whereabouts, and we have also raised this case with the Chinese authorities. We are in touch with his family.
So we're hearing not just from Chrystia Freeland, Ralph Goodale, the Prime Minister as well, but Chrystia Freeland now taking the lead on this file. And how is the Foreign Affairs Minister framing Canada's response to these detentions?
Well, it's quite interesting because they only found out about Spavor's, or got it confirmed about his detention, by fax from the Chinese authorities. In fact, the Chinese Foreign Ministry. He is being detained on suspicion of endangering national security. And of course, this is the second case, as you mentioned. The first case is diplomat Michael Kovrig. There you see a picture of him. That information came out earlier this week, but both cases really increase pressure on the Canadian government, and this pressure is because of the fact that Canada is holding an executive of the telecoms giant Huawei. That's the Chinese telecoms giant Huawei. So what Canada has done so far, it's increased security at its embassy in China as well as the consulates in China, and they're also demanding that they have access to the two men. So I'm sure this story is going to continue to develop as the day goes on.
So we will be back to you for further developments on that. Thank you so much for starting us off, though, Hannah, in Ottawa. But continuing to track those two Canadians and their status, detained, as we've said, in China, we have had from state media this morning a chilling warning in word, on text, and in video that this may be just the beginning of Beijing's retaliation for that arrest of Meng Wanzhou. And let's go to John, who has more on the very strong message being sent essentially by government.
Yeah, because this is the way the media works in China. There is a party person in every newsroom who approves all the copy. And certainly if you're putting things out on the web, again, controlled by the government, if you are putting out video, as we're about to see again, this would be a situation where woe betide the news director that put anything out there for the world to see in an environment like this that didn't have the strict approval of the government. So when we say it's in the Chinese media, we're effectively saying the Chinese government. So when we look at this video sent out, bear that in mind as you listen to the warnings given to Canada. Here it is.
Although there is no evidence that the detainment of Kovrig was linked to Meng's case, people assumed it was because Canada had gone too far, were expecting China to take revenge, and felt this was probably it. I personally believe that if Canada extradites Meng to the U.S., China's revenge will be far worse than detaining a Canadian.
So there you go. What that is, what form it could take, not specified there. Worth noting that, again, in the Chinese media, sometimes quoting the netizens. In other words, these are people who are out there on the web, on Chinese social media, so trying to almost put it at arm's length, effectively. But you reference to Canada being America's dog, referring to this as a political kidnapping and referring to this as Washington dirty tricks. So the rhetoric, pretty strong. Again, not officially coming from the government. The spokesperson hasn't come out at the podium and said, here's the deal. But the approved channels that China choose to speak through are making these kinds of threats and comments.
You talk about politics. Canada's been very clear In Canada's view, there is not a political motivation to any of what is going on. But we had this week the interview that Donald Trump gave to Reuters in which he said he would become involved. He would intervene in this case if it helped the U.S. secure a trade deal with China. That caused immense consternation when he said it, and continues today.
Yeah,
to
absolutely. When you say the view of Canada, it is the view of all Western democracies who recognize the rule of law in terms of international extradition treaties, with which Canada has agreements with 110 around the world. So when the U.S. president comes out and says, yeah, it's a bargaining chip, I could, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, this is met with apoplexy, really, in halls of power right around the world. But the Canadian minister involved, of course, Chrystia Freeland, in the way she often does, careful, strong, determined. Here it is.
Recognizing that Canada is a rule of law country, to ensure that any extradition request is about ensuring that justice is done, is about ensuring that the rule of law is respected and is not politicized or used for any other purpose.
And just adding to the brouhaha soup, if you will, on this, the Justice Department, Donald Trump's Justice Department, worth noting, they say a similar thing. Have a listen.
What we do at the Justice Department is law enforcement. We don't do trade. And so we follow the facts and we vindicate violations of U.S. law. That's what we're doing when we bring those cases. And I think it's very important for other countries to understand that. We are not a tool of trade when we bring the cases.
Worth noting that Chrystia Freeland has also, shall we say, suggested that the idea of a U.S. president invoking the threat to intervene could be, just could, not giving any free legal advice here, but could be used by Meng's lawyers. And that, effectively, as we know, would take the poison chalice away out of Canada's hands.
Well, I'm going to put that very question to a lawyer in a few minutes,
Okay.
John, as part of our
Worth asking.
ongoing coverage. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Want to as well give you this morning a sense of what it is like to be grabbed up without warning by Chinese security police. You'll remember the name Kevin and Julia Garrett. Those are two Canadians who'd been doing charity work in China for decades when they were suddenly taken into custody back in 2014 and accused of spying. Here's some of the interview they gave to our Katie Simpson, beginning with Julia's describing her arrest.
It happened as a sudden abduction from a dinner with no warning. I wasn't shown any badges. I actually didn't even know who it was. The fact that we were driven in the middle of the night, separated from each other, out into the middle of nowhere to be put in a compound.
They'll keep him in the dark about everything. No access to media, nothing whatsoever. Maybe no access to a lawyer. We didn't get access to a lawyer for almost a year. We couldn't talk about the case even when consular officials came. So he'll be very isolated, I think, and probably well guarded, but treated well.
And the only thing that I'm really thankful for, and that is that I would it's highly likely that they wouldn't use any harsh techniques or beat him or things like that based on our experience. At least we were really thankful for that, even though there was a really extreme psychological pressure.
Yes.
And the lights are on 24/7 and the interrogation is very intense and lasted 6 hours every day.
It was horrendous. It was fearful because we knew nothing of what was going on. They said we're being accused of spies, which made no sense whatsoever to us. And they just kept being very threatening. And so that made it very difficult to really understand what was going on because obviously we weren't spies.
My heart is really broken for him and his family and what they are going through, because our family was really in the dark to get any kind of a news that would have given them some confidence that we were okay.
Just hold on to hope. I mean, if they can write letters, that would be great. But I don't know if the Chinese Ministry of State Security will let them send letters. They only allowed us to receive letters later on, but just keep pressing both the government and the Chinese government.
Julia Garrett was held for 6 months but had to remain in China on bail for months after that. Kevin wasn't released until 2 years after being arrested. The couple now urging Ottawa to keep pushing Beijing to get Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig released.